Ever stop to think about how a single, powerful idea can actually give birth to an entire nation? How a belief that people share can be so strong that it literally redraws the map? Well, today, that's the incredible journey we're going to trace, the story of Pakistan, from a core idea to the laws that hold it together.
So this brings us to two really big questions, right? How does an idea, just a concept, actually become a country with borders and a flag? And then once you have that country, how do you take its founding spirit and capture it in a constitution that can guide it for generations to come? That's the story we're unpacking.
Okay, so first things first. Before there was a country called Pakistan, there was an idea, an ideology. And to really get what happened, we've got to start right there, with the concept that kicked the whole thing off.
So, what even is an ideology? It sounds kind of academic, right? But think of it like this. It's basically a nation's mission statement. The writer George Lewis called it a plan or program which is based upon philosophy. So it's not just some fuzzy feeling. It's a structured game plan, the ideals that give a whole nation its purpose. And for Pakistan, this ideology was crystal clear. The whole point was to create a unified state for the Muslims of the Indian subcontinent, a place where their national dignity, their culture, their entire way of life, all rooted in an Islamic philosophy, could be preserved and protected.
All right, so let's dig into the core philosophy that really provided the why for this new nation. It's known as the two-nation theory. And honestly, you can't understand Pakistan's creation without understanding this. It is the absolute bedrock.
At its heart, the theory is pretty simple, but wow, it's profound. It argued that Muslims weren't just a religious minority within a larger Indian identity. Nope. The argument was that they were a completely separate nation by every possible definition. And this wasn't just about religion. It was about totally distinct cultures, traditions, and histories.
And you know, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Pakistan's founder, he put it so clearly. He said they belonged to two different civilizations. Just think about that phrase for a second. It tells you everything about how deep this perceived divide was. It wasn't seen as just a difference of opinion, but a fundamental difference in identity.
But look, an idea is just an idea, right? No matter how powerful it is, it needs a political engine to actually make it a reality. For this cause, that engine was the All India Muslim League. And things moved fast. I mean, they had an initial meeting in Lucknow, and then boom, just a few months later in Dhaka, the party is officially established. And get this, 3,000 delegates showed up. That just goes to show you how much momentum this idea already had.
So, what was the fuel for its creation? Well, there were four main factors. It all started with that core belief in a separate Muslim identity. Then, there was this growing feeling that the biggest political party, the Indian National Congress, was really only representing Hindu interests. And then, you had specific events, like the whole controversy over the partition of Bengal and the push for separate electorates that just added more fuel to the fire.
And this right here, this is so crucial. A quote from Jinnah in 1946 just makes it all click. He said the demand wasn't just about getting a piece of land. No, the goal was to create a laboratory, a state where they could actually experiment with and put Islamic principles of social justice into practice. The idea, that was always the most important thing.
So the nation was born in 1947. But you know, creating a country is one thing. Building a stable state is something else entirely. Those early years were just plain chaotic, which made the need for a national blueprint, a constitution, more urgent than ever.
I mean, just look at this timeline. Right out of the gate, the new country is thrown into turmoil. There's a war, a massive refugee crisis, and then the devastating loss of its founder, followed by the assassination of its first prime minister. That kind of intense instability is exactly why it took 26 long years to finally get a constitution that everyone could agree on in 1973.
Okay, so what exactly is a constitution? Let's just think of it as the ultimate rule book. It lays out all the powers and, just as importantly, the limits of the government. It defines the rights of the citizens, and it acts as the supreme law of the land that everyone, from the president to the public, has to follow.
So the reason the 1973 Constitution was such a breakthrough, the reason it was adopted unanimously, was because it finally settled the three biggest, most divisive arguments. How should Islam's role be reflected in the law? How should power be shared between the central government and the provinces? And how should responsibilities be divided between the president and the prime minister? They finally cracked the code.
So let's roll out that blueprint and see what it actually says. We're going to break down the key features of the 1973 Constitution and see exactly how that original ideology was finally written down into law.
So structurally, the Constitution set up a modern democratic state. It created a federal system with a good deal of provincial autonomy, a parliamentary form of government, a two-house legislature, and, this is really crucial, it enshrined the principles of an independent judiciary and the rule of law.
And here is where we see that founding ideology made into law, plain and simple. The country's official name became the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Islam was declared the state religion. The Constitution states that ultimate sovereignty belongs to Allah, and it requires that both the president and prime minister must be Muslim. It also created a special Council of Islamic Ideology to advise the legislature. But, and this is a really big but, at the exact same time, the Constitution guaranteed a whole list of fundamental rights for all of its citizens. This is so important. It protects your personal security, it guarantees freedoms of speech and religion for everyone, it prohibits discrimination, and it bans forced labor. And these rights are for all Pakistanis, regardless of their faith.
So when you boil it all down, here's the key takeaway. The 1973 Constitution is a fascinating balancing act. It formally establishes a state that's built on the foundation of its Islamic ideology, while at the same time, it embeds the principles of a modern democracy and fundamental human rights for every single citizen.
This whole journey really shows us how an idea was turned into a nation and then how that idea was written down into law. But it kind of leaves us with one final thought to chew on. If a constitution is the blueprint for a nation, is the building ever truly finished? Or is it a constant process of living up to, interpreting, and evolving those founding ideals?